Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
We have Zoom audio. Okay. Okay, this one. Sure. Because there's a virtual speaker. Just basically notifications. So he'll be part of the panel. Okay. For most of the time. Okay. So I think, do you need to mute us when he's speaking? No, I just put a gate on. So whenever he's speaking, so whenever we are speaking, it won't interfere with this. Okay. I trust you. I think I would like to speak a bit louder because like if he speaks softer, then he'll get muted. Okay. I mean, mic test is level before it comes in. They did already. He sounded quite good. Okay. Yeah. It's just me wondering.
Can I flip this over with you? Sure. Do you want to do, we'll just, no, it's fine. So just technically look around the corner, sometimes around the glasses.
Here's someone with glasses. Is it him?
I think we're gonna have time for a lot of audience questions. If you all, we can make this an actively engaged, tailor-made talk just for you. What is it that made you all want to come to this session?
On cross-border collaboration and an entrepreneurial mindset in the context of climate crisis, but also other wider contexts of GovTech. So my name's Alexander Holt from the Scottish Government, and I'm joined by Kat Nikolovsky, Executive Director of the Civic Software Foundation, a not-for-profit based in the States and in Europe. And on screen, who will pop up in a second. There we are. We have João Vasconcelos, who's the Senior Governance Specialist of the GovTech Global Unit at the World Bank. So João, thank you very much for joining us here, and we can see you in full definition on screen. So thank you for giving your time as well. And Kat, thank you. So this topic, entrepreneurial mindset and cross-border collaboration. It's these two elements that then help tackle global issues. And so this panel is really looking about how that happens. What are the ingredients that make successful ecosystems tackle global issues? And that is, climate crisis as we are exploring today and over the next 2 weeks of COP, but it goes beyond that in terms of social inequality, housing, name any issue that affects, indeed child poverty, that affects the delivery of public services. So how can this collaboration mindset, this entrepreneurial mindset, this ability to work across borders help tackle these global issues? And of course, as we will unearth today, that what works in one country may work in another, but it may not. And how do you take often that global take and making it locally relevant? And it was great speaking to some of the folks in the audience before this session, hearing about some of the applications of innovation. So I will stop there and pose the question to Kat. In your mind, with your extensive experience, and perhaps it might be worth just saying a little bit about Civic Software Foundation, who you work with, to give us a bit of breadth and depth of entrepreneurial ecosystems.
Thank you, Alexander. Appreciate that. Well, Civic Software Foundation is a nonprofit, which might not be the first thing that you think of when you think about entrepreneurship. You might think about startups and founders. I am the founder of Civic Software Foundation. We've been around for about a little over 10 years. We started out regionally focused in the Pacific Northwest, really just trying to tackle local issues, looking at building technology infrastructure for public sector with particularly an open source approach. That there are a lot of business models that look at something like open source and see that almost as though it's free software, but it's not true, right? That this is something that comes out of the community, which almost seems like DIY. And that doesn't work for public sector because you need reliability, you need maintenance, you need to be able to have a very strong sense of reliability for those products. So this is coming around to say, if you can build a nonprofit technology driver, you need to meet so many of the barriers in order to work with public sector that really is a business, but at the same time, it's very different financial structures than having a startup. We did not get started through venture capital. To start being able to build software that is reliable enough and scalable enough that it can actually serve state, local, national governments, you actually need millions of dollars if you were to get, for example, just the engineers in place to be able to build those kinds of systems. But through the open source community, you can actually get quite a lot of public benefit that is pro bono or maybe low bono, but it's complex work that needs to be precise and reliable. So our nonprofit really focuses in on supporting those kinds of activities. But if we were venture backed, and if all of this were to roll up to me, let's say as a founder, as an entrepreneur, we wouldn't get that kind of goodwill from the community. It's important that this is owned in the public interest and that it's maintained in custodianship with our government partners. And it also allows for us to make sure that we're advocating all the time for citizens' digital rights. The way that we handle data is not commodified. And we actually have become over time really influential in the policies and strategies that help for our government partners to think through how to actually manage these types of citizen data challenges and contextual challenges, also in the AI space, because, you know, without that profit distortion, I think that you can see a little bit more clearly sometimes how to build better technology, because you're not always trying to cut corners for scale. And anyways, this is, yeah, here we go.
We're delighted.
Come on.
We're missing one, but we've only started. We held on as fast, as long as we could. So delighted also to be joined by Martin Hazy, who's the chair of the Premier of South Australia's Cloud Action Group. And I know he'll have hot-footed it, literally, from another part of the Blue Zone, where you're in hot demand. So thank you very much, Martin, for giving up your time. And our exposition is around entrepreneurial mindset, collaboration in tackling, global issues. And we're joined by Zhao from the World Bank and Kat from the Civic Software Foundation in the US and in Europe. Martin, whilst now that you've joined, unless you'd like a few minutes to catch your breath, or you can go straight into a bit about your role, or we can hand over to Zhao.
Thank you, Alex. I think I've recovered. I apologize, everybody. I have literally ran across the entire Blue Zone, like weaving through people. I've just got caught up in another talk. I must say, I'm so pleased to be doing this because I'm just so passionate about this topic. I'll share very briefly about my background. So I started as an entrepreneur, and I built a very small business which turned into a $30 million a year business. And it was a national retail company in Australia. And we were doing very innovative things. So I'm a great believer in innovation and the application of technology to kind of drive kind of progress. I then taught MBA students for 7 years at university level on the topic of entrepreneurship. So I look at it from a practical, academic and also application process. But I've taken that philosophy into being the Lord Mayor of Adelaide in South Australia between 2014 and 2018, and then subsequently the Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce over recent years, until today, whereby I have concurrently, entrepreneurs always do lots of things at the same time, you know that. I've been for the last 6 years the chair of the Premier's Climate Change Council, which brings me to COP28 here in Dubai. And we advise the State Cabinet about adaptation, mitigation, innovation, and the growth of the low emissions economy in South Australia. And I also have another role as Special Envoy to Singapore and Southeast Asia for the South Australian Government, which is not a diplomatic role, it's a trade role, it's a commercial role, to attract investment into South Australia and help South Australian startups and companies expand their footprints into the Southeast Asian market, which you all know is growing rapidly. So the commonality of all of that, and at the heart of that, is the innovation necessity. And there's a gentleman, which I know you know well, in South Australia called Aaron Hausler. And I speak on behalf of Aaron today. who's really kind of almost like the great champion of the climate tech space in South Australia. And 2 years ago, I'm vested in this space. And several years ago, Aaron said to me, I've got to talk to you about climate tech. I said, what's that? And he's educated me, and I've seen it firsthand. This growing cluster of innovative startups, post-revenue companies, SMEs, and corporates in South Australia who are all innovating in the climate tech space. And it's just the most fascinating area because it's got demand on its side. And to give you any kind of better evidence of that is COP. I mean, I heard there were 70,000 people here, but someone said, no, it's over 100,000. So it's quite incredible. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a very long introduction. I apologize.
No, not at all. Martin, it's great. And there's kind of great breadth and depth of experience, which we will delve more into. So, Zhao, thank you for joining us again. And so we're going to explain a little bit about your role within World Bank and that sense of the global perspective that you see around entrepreneurial mindsets in tackling global issues.
Okay, thanks a lot. First of all, it's great to be here, although remotely. So great to join this this panel right now. So as mentioned, I'm a senior governance specialist within the World Bank and working the GovTech Global unit of the bank. So for your reference, the bank has been working in this area of digitalizing governments for decades, let's say, but it was more recently, in the end of 2019, that was launched what we call the GovTech Global Partnership. And it's a partnership that is really with really a multi-stakeholder thinking, focused on bring on board the experience of different stakeholders. And on this, we're talking about governments, but also the academia, the private sector, and the civil society around the digital transition of governments. So it's been quite a journey that we've been making. In fact, the GovTech Global Alliance is one of our partners, and we've been developing a big network that has right now more than 60 partners, again, reflecting this kind of multi-stakeholder background. And we have here partners that are from different governments. So it could be from the governments of Korea, of Estonia, of Israel, Mozambique, or Bangladesh, for instance. But we also have the private sector on board and partnering with Microsoft, with Amazon Web Services or MasterCard, or the academia and bringing the MIT on board, or civil society and other international organizations like the OECD, the European Commission, or other the development banks. In our view, what brings really together this this group of partners is the capacity to collaborate with a common purpose. And when we talk about the digital transition of the public sector, what we feel mostly right now, it's what we call a shift, or a necessary shift from techno-optimism to problem-driven approaches. Okay, so looking at technology not as an end on itself, and the need to go what we call trendy issues in terms of technology. So for instance, we should not use artificial intelligence because it's trendy, or we need to do something on AI. We focus on this to solve problems, and problems that need to be fixed through technologies, whether they are emerging or old school technologies. And in our perspective, if there is a common purpose that can bring us together right now, and COP reflects this, is we are facing two big transitions right now, the digital transition and the green transition. And we still feel when coordinating with our different stakeholders that sometimes these are transitions that are running in parallel from a policy perspective. So there is a need of more integration, more synergies between the policies of these two transitions, making sure that probably we can talk about green digital transition. So it's important to see this kind of feedback from our partners, and it's a lot on the spirit, on this kind of thinking that we've been working together. But again, happy to further explore these and other ideas. Over to you.
Thank you. And that whole thing of collaboration with common purpose, and I think that's the key thing. And Martin, with your expose around the whole interest you have in climate tech, with Yao as interest in GovTech, you have this overlap, and the overlap there is that working with government, that delivery of public services, whether it's end users as citizens, or whether it's policy officials looking to change. So we're interested in this intersect. So if you take that intersect between climate tech and GovTech, and then you pull in public sector, private sector, third sector, academia, NGOs, those are the ingredients to making change happen. But then what else needs to happen, Martin, if you're taking these ingredients and pulling them together?
I'm going to go back to Entrepreneurship 101, is to what's your vision? And if I look at the jurisdiction of South Australia, where I come from, is that we have a Premier who is just determined to make South Australia a leader, or to re-industrialise South Australia in the low carbon economy. He's very clear about that. And it's driving a lot of actions and legislation and policy and programs through a governmental level. Like the whole machinery of government is changing as a consequence of this vision. And I'll share very quickly and practically what that means. South Australia wants to lead the world in the production of green hydrogen. Now, that's one source of renewable energy. We have 72% renewable energy in our grid currently, predominantly through wind and solar. We're on a trajectory by 2030 to have 100% renewable energy. Now, that's like world leading. But we need a source of renewable energy which can store renewable energy, because wind and solar is not a storable source of energy in itself. We've got battery storage tech and many other things, but you can't hold up a grid through battery storage tech at a statewide level. So the Premier's clear about this, and they're legislating, they're putting policy and programs in. And what that then means to the entrepreneurship community is kind of significant in my view, because it will be the entrepreneurs who will actually start with demand on their side, because government leadership through the whole GovTech piece that Zhao was talking about there's a very clear vision in South Australia which gets repeated repeatedly to all stakeholders in the state. But if you then look, where do the emissions come from in South Australia? Well, they're coming from energy, but they're actually decreasing, because as we get to 2030, we'll be 100% renewables, we'll be a net exporter of renewable energy into the national grid. But there are areas like industrial processes, agriculture, mining and enterprises, transport networks, which all need to decarbonise. And we're turning our mind now towards policies and programs around decarbonising the other sectors so that we can get to our net zero aspiration earlier than 2050. And we get to legislate interim targets next year. So my kind of message is, Alex, is that the government will send the signal, create the conditions, but not necessarily deliver the solutions. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You want the business community, you want the innovators delivering the solutions, but you want the government creating the conditions so that you can, so you're swimming with the tide and you're not swimming against it. That's my major message, is government needs to be very clear and consistent. Another thing is what everyone craves in the business community, in the innovation community, is consistency. They want to know that this is the vision and that you're going to deliver it, and that the government and subsequent governments are going to deliver it. And there's not going to be a mid-season change, because you're building a business around this. That's really, really important. So that's a message we often have to the government about see it through, because there's a lot of people depending on this for lives and livelihoods and economic opportunities. So see it through, right? And work, collaboration is king. I was sharing this in my previous discussion. is that a government can't deliver this on their own. And truth be told, nor should they. It's academia, it is NGOs, it's corporates, it's the investment community, and there's tangible appetite amongst funds to look at projects in this space. I see it all the time. There's got to be a lot, not just vertical integration, there needs to be a lot of lateral communication and collaboration. Otherwise, the ecosystem collapses. It's absolutely critical.
So it's interesting, you're talking about ecosystems and collapsing. Kat, from your perspective as a not-for-profit, how do you, now you talked a little bit earlier about kind of your premise around and your value sets around kind of being a not-for-profit, but in this ingredients of an ecosystem that thrives, whether it's climate tech, whether it's gov tech, what role of the not-for-profits?
Well, I think that when we're talking about entrepreneurship mindset, not necessarily a specific type of business structure, right? And I think that nonprofits sometimes get a reputation for not being the pinnacle of technology delivery, right? And so you think about the business community, you think about someone, I mean, when you are, I think, absolutely right around vision, is that the technology is all about asking the right questions about what kinds of needs we need to solve for. But oftentimes when you're a business, you need to deliver a solution. And the solution, when it gets procured and you're trying to work with government partners, there's a tendency to want to make it static, right? Because we talk a lot about developing innovation and implementing that, but maintenance is 80% of the life cycle of most types, particularly of software and other types of physical systems that we see around us all the time. And then beyond that, we can even begin to speak about scale, which is part of the focus of this panel, thinking about cross-border. So and I would say even one more beyond scale, we're looking at impact. And there's always the questions about the citizens and about our constituencies when we are designing types of solutions. And so maybe to take even a step back, we would imagine that we have so many of the raw technical abilities, and many of these types of tools and solutions are already here. Sometimes within particularly the GovTech space, it's not always about creating a new silver bullet, but it's about putting the complexity of the right pieces together and working that into existing workflows and infrastructures that can actually get it to deliver. Then when you see something is working in one place, you cannot export it often exactly like this to another kind of region, right? I think adaptation is so key. And so when technology, it is an illusion that it's static, right? And so what government really needs to get good at when they're participating in this, whether it's a vendor space or they're collaborators on innovation and entrepreneurship, is seeing the life cycle of continuous adaptation, because your solution in 2023 may look different, stemming from perhaps the same source, but evolving over the next 10 years. And then particularly when you look toward cross-border, there's many more adaptations to consider.
You mentioned the P word there, procurement. Anyone who deals with government, has anyone sort of done any work with government before? Yeah, and have you been through the procurement process? Yeah, painful, sublime. So and that's it. And so, Zhao, what do you see? Because in terms from that procurement piece, from your global perspective with some of the partners, in terms of, do they recognize that they need to think differently, that it's not just about an end product, actually it's about a continuous service, and that one that might change or will change over the course of its lifetime? So, whether it's, digital government or, hydrogen production, there's a whole mindset in government required and skill set. So could you just comment a bit about that aspect, please?
Okay, thanks a lot. And I think I like the way that you mentioned the P word here about procurement, that actually it's always a big issue when you are developing systems, and namely green systems in government. What I can share with you, and from from working with our different stakeholders, is that there is a clear consensus about the need to improve the way that government procure, and improve it as a mechanism to make sure that you are able to reach to the different ecosystems that are out there, ecosystems that are able to provide solutions to the problems that you are working with, whether we're talking about SMEs or startups, and even the capacity to reach out beyond your borders, meaning having procurement that is cross-border. So it's a common challenge that the governments face. There are, of course, regions of the globe that are more advanced on this journey, and here I think the European Commission is always a good example. What we feel right now as GovTech Global Partnership is the need to transpose and or to share this knowledge from regions that are more ahead in the digital journey, namely in terms of procurement, with regions that are earlier in this digital journey, namely, and let me use the expression, the global south here. So making sure that the maturity of experiences that are lived in countries that are more developed can be reflected and can be shared with countries that are in developing stage. And let me also share here that probably the most common expression that was also touched here, that is, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach that can be useful for the different countries. So what works in Korea might not work in Brazil, or what works in Estonia might not work in South Africa, just to give some examples. But still, it's this diversity of experiences that can enable countries to learn from each other, or governments to learn from each other. So you don't need to replicate experiences exactly as they are from country A or country B, but you should and you need to build on those experiences to go ahead. And on this, you were talking always here in terms of collaboration. Let me also underline the role of multilateralism as that has a fundamental role here, not only seeing and being able to act beyond borders, so seeing the problems and seeing problems that need to be fixed beyond the existing borders, but also having this cross-border approach with a multi-stakeholder thinking. So we normally say that, and this is an important statement that we have, that in the case of GovTech, it's beyond government. So it's not only to governments to work on the digitalization of their public sectors. It's about bringing the academia, the civil society, the private sector on board. And this applies also and mostly when we're talking about having GovTech approach that are green by default, that can contribute to climate mitigation and adaptation. So, and this is one of the focus that we have right now, but happy to further expand on more ahead in the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's something here around learning from each other. So a bit of context as to why we have the GovTech Global Alliance panels either side of the screen, and that's a network of like-minded innovation teams across governments, academia, not-for-profit, who are public purpose in their innovative outlooks. And we're here at COP, as this is our third one, because we've been running a program which is about recognizing the value that governments can play from a procurement perspective to give entrepreneurs and not-for-profits an opportunity to get in front of governments within our network to then go on to present at COP. So we're here to really to source, surface, and scale climate tech solutions for global public sector applications. And within that GovTech Global Alliance, which has been running for 3.5 years, there's a real mentality about learning from each other. That whole cultural appreciation of how might we do something similar, not necessarily the same, but something similar that matches and meets our cultural nuances on the ground. And so, Zhao, you're absolutely right about that whole cultural appreciation of learning from each other, recognizing that different regions and states and communities have slightly different nuances, and you can't stamp a one size fits all. But I think this really sums up a mindset of looking up and out, not down and in. And what we find is those organizations that engage in this manner are ones which are inherently more, I say, successful, because they are looking up and out, not being so introspective. So, Kat, just sort of as we kind of come to the last sort of round of points, you mentioned about data earlier. Now, data covers all sorts of aspects, but I know that you wanted to pick out a piece on the use and openness of it.
Well, I think maybe to bring it full circle into the conversation, data is never the point, right? Getting back to what we see as impact, how we measure impact, and how data is a part of the information ecosystem that is behind most of those technologies. And those technologies, even as we've seen AI absolutely accelerate in the consumer market this year, there's many other kinds of innovations that drive that, right? And I think that the thing that when we're talking about learning from each other, and the biggest benefit of GovTech Global Alliance is creating those conditions of trust, right? Because it's easy to talk about and do knowledge sharing spaces when you're talking about successes. But what about those failures? Because there's a lot that happen on the way to figuring out what works. And that is very scary to do when you're talking about making changes or innovations using particularly citizen data, right? And so I think it's really important that specifically maybe just touching base on AI, or that, because Joao mentioned this earlier, that you don't want to just use a tool because it's available, and being able to, as we integrate these more emergent technologies into government settings that are responsible for citizens like can be impacted, you want to move forward making progress, but you also are risk averse because you don't want to do something that's actually going to create harm to the people that these things are meant to serve. And so this is really important, why you have relationships with people who have done this elsewhere and can be honest and create resources to help people understand what works and share that. And now it's more important than ever because technology is moving so fast.
Actually, just to give you a little plug, Civic Software Foundation delivers a great course in the sort of how to scale ethically the kind of organizations. And I know some of our companies who've been through that have found that really interesting. So do check out Civic Software Foundation. Kat, you look poised to say something else. No, you're just about to hand over to Martin. Martin, you know that point about trust, because so there's a thing here around trust for citizens trusting government. How does that work the other way around in terms of people trusting, businesses trusting government?
I'm going to answer that in two parts. The discussion we're having about where GovTech and climate tech intersect, and this is just kind of my observations over the years. My encouragement to anyone who's looking to work with government from a problem solving or a procurement perspective is to actually know more about what problem you're looking to solve than what the government does. I often see entrepreneurs who will apply through a tender or a procurement process, and they'll be very frustrated that they weren't successful in that opportunity. And I'll ask the questions, do you know what the government's economic priorities are? Do you know what their program priorities are? Do you know what the legislation is which supports a program which you're looking, or is contextual to what's being delivered? And honestly, the answer is no, more than yes. You've got to do an enormous amount of DD before you do anything with government. And I think you've also got to give before you get, which means you've got to go to government and say, look, I could speak at that event. I could help you solve that problem and actually do pro bono work, because that's where the trust comes in. This is like building a relationship like you would in many other contexts, and not just go for the transaction. And I see this so many times. And I've been on the other end of it. So it's a lived experience. It's not just kind of a theory, is to work collaboratively with government to really understand what problem they're looking to solve. And in the climate change adaptation, mitigation, and low carbon space, kind of government will lead it because they have to, because it's government who's setting the goals for decarbonisation and net zero by 2050. So you've kind of got their undivided attention, usually. But my greatest advice is to know more about the problem or the solution or the program than what the government does itself. And that in itself will build this inherent level of trust. And it actually positions you better commercially. So it's kind of a bit of a triple bottom line approach, but to me, that's a wise way of going about things. It will impact upon your resources. It will have an enormous impact upon your time to learn all this. And you've almost got to step back from a transactional approach in the first instance in order to have a transactional outcome in the second instance. And it's probably not that different from doing business with NFPs. So that would be my greatest advice. And sorry if I haven't answered that accurately.
No, I did, because that's even better answer than the question I asked. But that's a really good point, because I spend a lot of time when engaging with businesses is, right, have you read this policy? Do you understand that this paragraph here is relating to what you're wanting to solve? So that whole due diligence piece, that DD piece, is super important. And I suppose that would go for the World Bank as well, Zhao, just understanding the priorities of the World Bank to see how organizations can work with you. But as we sort of draw to a close, Zhao, I know that you and Kat and Camilla and other members of the GovTech Global Alliance have been working on a new partnership around a GovTech Innovation Labs. Is there anything we can finally say on that? Because I know that the website's going live from that very sort of, I think we just put it live. So yes, a bit more about that, because I know you were keen to drop that into conversation.
Okay, thanks a lot for this opportunity. Yeah, in fact, within the GovTech Global Partnership, we've been working and trying to do what we preach, bring the different stakeholders on board, and we launched different what we call working groups that focus on specific work streams based on the demand that we feel from our partner countries, from our client countries, etc. One of the areas that emerged as particularly important was the area of, let's call it GovTech innovation, or the creation of GovTech labs. Because we've been seeing, and we know this from our stakeholders, different public innovation labs or GovTech labs emerging in very different contexts, at the central level, at the regional or local level, in different geographies. But there are also different lessons that you can have some there. Some of these initiatives work better, engaging the stakeholder, for instance. Others have, as we normally say, substantial room for improvement. So what we are partnering right now with the GovTech Global Alliance is the development of a working group that can bring different stakeholders, again, government and non-government, from the global north and from the global south, that can, on the one hand, share experiences about how to develop this kind of GovTech innovation or development of GovTech innovation labs, but also can work as a kind of community builder Okay, so having different contact points with various perspective about how to develop this kind of policies. And if there is, if I may, also to make the link here to where we are right now, what we feel is also an increasing demand between this topic of GovTech innovation and the topic of linking it with the green transition that is underway. Meaning, how can we use the ecosystem of stakeholders? How can governments take the full benefit of this kind of ecosystems to develop a digitalization that is green by default? Okay, and again, on this, governments can have a lot of expertise, but the expertise of the private sector, of the academia, of the civil society is absolutely crucial here. So, in line also with a report that we launched recently on greening of tech, we are putting together some efforts to develop a working group on this kind of innovation, and we hope, if not by the end of the year, in the beginning of 2024, to start developing this work. So let me say, stay tuned, because news are coming on this. Over to you, Alexander.
Thank you so much. So there you have it, a new a kind of forum and innovation lab, the GovTech Innovation Labs, in partnership with World Bank and the GovTech Global Alliance coming. Check out govtechglobal.org for that. But from Martin, giving the entrepreneur's perspective and then the government perspective, thank you very much. Kat, your expose around trust and the need for that, thank you. And Zhao, thank you. Thanks to everyone who's joined here today and online. On the 4th and 5th, we have some climate tech showcases. So these are at the Climate Action Innovation Zone, the Mudinat Janira Conference Center. And that's on the 4th at 1:30 and on the 5th at 9:30, where you get to see 20 climate tech, GovTech teams in action on stage, giving their rapid pitches on their solutions to address the climate crisis. But from here in the ICLEI multi-action level innovation zone here, thank you all so much. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.